Yeah.
So we are already there.
Thanks for joining us for our fourth Cuba Hangout. Through April, we're going to be exploring relevant and popular Cuba-related topics during intimate conversations with a variety of fantastic speakers and members of our community. Our goal is to add meaningful content to a complicated and often misrepresented topic, which is Cuba and U.S. relations. This ongoing series is brought to you by CubaOne Foundation and Cuba Educational Travel. I'm Haiti Cano. I actually traveled to Cuba with CubaOne Foundation last month for their first ever women's trip, Unidas. This trip brought 10 Cuban-American women to Cuba. I'm originally from Hialeah, Florida, but I'm living in West Palm Beach right now. I am in my last semester of graduate school for social work at Florida Atlantic University, and I'm super excited to be with you all today. So today's guest speaker is Carlos Lazo. He is a Cuban-American Spanish teacher based in Washington State, and he's made waves in US-Cuba relations in vastly different ways, from testifying in front of the United States Congress against restrictions on family travel to Cuba, to a viral music video of his students singing Orisha song, Cuba Isla Bella. He's a military veteran, a loyal father, an inspiring teacher, and a human bridge between the people of the US and Cuba. And we are so lucky to have you with us today, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
First question is, who is Carlos Lazo? Can you tell us your story and how you come to occupy such a special and unique space in Cuba, in US-Cuba relations?
Well, Haiti, Carlos Lazo, or I am a Cuban American. I am the son of a cigar maker and a housewife. And I live in Cuba since I was born to 27 years old. In despite of the problems that we had in Cuba, but I have a beautiful childhood. In my neighborhood, I'm from Jaimanita, and when I visit Cuba, I visit that place again because that's a place where my roots are, where I learn so many things, where I have the support of so many friends, that friendship that lasts up to today. And then in 1988, my family left Cuba when I was 15 years old. My mother came to the United States with my brother, and I remained in Cuba by myself. Actually, I was the kid who lived by himself in that apartment. And I have to go to high school and finish high school just as a what we call cabeza de familia, but the only head in my family was me, right? And then I always have the idea of reuniting with my family. In 1988, I tried to escape from Cuba, and at that time, the Cuban government used to incarcerate people for when they try to escape illegally, and I end up in jail for 1 year in Quibicán. I came out in 1989, still thinking about how to leave Cuba. I mean, and one of the things that my wife says that I am sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, is I'm very persistent. When an idea comes to my head, I just want to do it. And then in 1991, I tried one more time. And this time, after 4 days in the ocean, I was rescued 6 miles from Key West, and I arrived to the United States. I spent a few days a few years in Miami with my family. My mother was there. I did different kind of jobs, and I think that identified me with so many of my Cuban-American fellow brothers and sisters, because I came here and like them, I work delivering pizzas. I work as a waiter in a restaurant. I drive a tractor trailer, a huge truck. Eventually, I end up studying a little bit of mental health, and I work as a mental health technician. Then one day in 1998, during all those years, it's very hard for me at least, it was very hard to learn English. I couldn't go to school or anything, right? Because I have to take care of other needs. Then in 1998, I found this article from the magazine, Money magazine, I think that said that Seattle was the best place to live in the United States for families. And I said, you know what? I should try that. And then I just buy a ticket and came to Seattle without knowing anybody. And that was one of the best decisions that I ever made, because the city, the state, have been over my expectations. I live here with my wife, my children, and basically I was so excited and so grateful in this state that I, as a way to be thankful to the state, in 2000, I signed for the Washington National Guard as a combat medic. And I joined the Guard. At that time, we didn't have in mind that there was a war coming or anything. And finally, in 2003, I was deployed to Iraq as part of the troops, as a combat medic supporting the troops over there. I have 2 children from previous marriage in Cuba, and those children, I always visit Cuba, and I always went over there and support them with money, and we have a very good relationship with the kids and the families over there. But in 2003, there was this, the Bush administration, 2004, put in place restrictions that prevent Cuban Americans from visit their families in Cuba every year, as I used to do. But in this case, the restriction prevent them from going over there. We have to go just every 3 years, and they were not humanitarian exceptions. And then at that time, I was actually, when I came back from Iraq, from my 2 weeks of R&R or vacation, I tried to visit Cuba, and that was one of the days where the restriction took place. And that restriction surprised me right there in the Miami airport. Basically, I was coming from the war, 2 weeks of vacation, trying to visit my 2 sons in Cuba, and the administration that I was fighting for in Iraq basically prevent me from visiting my children in Cuba. And I basically feel very upset about it. Because I felt that I was fighting for freedom, but at the same time, I was losing my freedom to support my family. And I started campaigning right there. I started talking to the media. When I went back to Iraq, I sent a video to the Congress telling about how inhumane and unfair and cruel were these travel restrictions. And basically that bring me to be some kind as a spokesman of how bad this was for Cuban policy and for Cuban families, and how this should be changed. And we went. I went to the. I testified in the U.S. Senate. I went to different media, CNN, always advocating for the changing of this restriction and allowing Cuban Americans to visit their families whenever they want. Basically, also, I always have been the believer that the best way to bring ideals and different perspective to other countries is by talking to the people there, and not just bringing our ideas, because we don't have the monopoly of ideas, right, but also learning from those people, right? And I think that this was, instead of creating a good environment for the Cuba relationship, US-Cuba was bad. And then I kept fighting, and not just me, but many people fought, and eventually we even support the first candidate that said that he will finish those restrictions was Obama. And then I said at that time, well, that's my candidate, because if he is going to take away the restriction and he's going to allow me to see my family in Cuba without any restriction, that's a person that I want in the White House. And he did it. He changed those things.
So, Carlos, so thank you so much for sharing that. You've hit a lot of great points. You mentioned serving for the U.S. in the Iraq War and how you made your life in this country. but you still return back to Cuba and you proudly display, your Cubanism and everything. So a lot of people refer to you as an American and a Cuban patriot. So can you talk to us about your identity and what it's like to be a Cuban American?
Well, identity, that's something that I really wake up and wonder, right? Because after so many years, I have been living in this country half of my life. And I live half of my life in Cuba. I'm gonna become, I'm 53, I'm gonna be 54 soon. And basically 27 in Cuba, 27 over here is basically half of my life. And I've considered not just that, that number as a numerical number, but also my identity. I feel as a Cuban, I feel a lot of love for the country where I was born, and I feel a lot of love for the country, my adoptive country. And I feel that I want to do the best thing for both countries. And I found through many years of relationship, and from the time that I was born, that there was animosity between our two countries. There was always fight for this or that, and that fight never brought anything good to our people. I mean, to the regular people. Then when I think about identity, I think that, and I want to make like a metaphoric idea here, I think that the Cuba is my mother. I always think about that. And the United States is my father. And I love both of them. And I want for my father and my mother, imagine a kid whose parents are divorced and they don't want to talk and they just fight. How bad is that? I suffered that when I was a kid, but now I'm suffering, or have been suffering that in another scale. Cuba is my mother, the United States is my father, and they are just fighting, or for most of the time they have been fighting. And I want for my mother, Cuba, and my father, the United States, to stop fighting, to come together, to find things that they have in common, and to make their children, us, happy by having a good relationship. Yeah,
that's a great analogy. Thank you for sharing that. I also want to talk to you about your use of music and literature and everything from Martí to Sima Funk to educate your students about Cuban history and culture. So I'm wondering, what do you share with Cuban friends and family about the United States?
Well, with Cuban friends and family, there are so many things that I learned over here, right? When I was in Cuba, due to this animosity between the two countries, we always have a bad perspective about the United States, about the people of the United States, right? And I laugh a lot because my wife sometimes tell me a story. When she was a child, her grandmother says, Lisette, let's go to the United States. And my wife was a child, and she said, no, I want to go to Poland. The United States is bad. I don't want, they are going to kill me over there. I mean, like this idea that people have about, but what I share about the United States with my friends, with my family, even with the Cuban people, is that we have a commonality. We have something in common. Families in the United States, families in Cuba, all want the same for the children, all want to have a good life, to have a good future, to have safe communities. And that was strange. When I became a teacher, I find out that families are basically tied and bound by their humanity. And it's not just families in the United States and Cuba. As a combat medic in Iraq, I have the chance to meet Iraqis, even Iraqi prisoners. And I always found that we have this commonality. We always care about our families, our children. We want the best things for our families. And then the United States, I talk in Cuba, when I talk to friends and they ask me about the United States, I try to show the human part of the people, the families that I know, my students, who are the students who have so much feeling and so much support for any injustice, anything that happened around the world. For instance, I show my students what happened in Cuba recently with a tornado, and some students were literally crying. And one of them says, Señor Lazo, what can we do? to help the Cubans. And some of them have been in Cuba. And then when you bring people together, they can learn so many things about their communities and their families. And we are all the same. And that's what I basically share with my family. We are the same. Maybe we have different customs. Maybe we have eat different food. Maybe, but at the end, we are humans. Como like Jose Marti used to say, there is just one race, the human race. Right.
Thank you. So about your students, so you turned social media upside down in Cuban and Cuban communities in the US with your video of your students singing Isla Bella by Orichas. So can you talk to us how like that experience was like?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even when the video took place in June last year, a few months ago, we have been doing this in class for years already. I mean, not just with the music of Orisha, but before with music of December Bueno, Benny More, Celia Cruz, my students, and I found this a good methodology of teaching using movement in the classroom and dancing and learning new words through music. It's very engaging for the students. The video of Cuba Isla Bella, right now they are learning songs. Simafunk is Me voy pa mi casa, and they enter the classroom with an environment of Cuban music, and it's so engaging. And the classroom is not just this boring place where, at least in my case, for many years when I was a student, sit down there and wait for a lecture of the teacher, but they own the class. And then we basically decide to make a video. And they decide, our classroom is called La Fábrica de Sueños, or the Factory of Dreams. The first time that we went to Cuba in April last year, it came as a dream from many students. We were learning Jose Marti's poetry, and then one student said, Señor Lazo, what about if we could sing La Guantanamera to some Cuban kids? And we said, well, let's dream about it and let's do it. And we basically end up going to Cuba and not just singing La Guantanamera to the Cuban kid, but singing with Cuban kids La Guantanamera. Then in the case of Orisha, basically the same. They love Orisha, they love Cuba Isla Bella and all their many songs. And one student after that said, Señor Lazo, what if we bring Orisha here? Is that possible? And I said, well, let's try it. Let's learn the song and let's send a video to Orisha. The purpose of the video was sending the video to Orisha and asking Orisha if one day they can come, they will come. And the video ended up being viral, and so far I have like 1 million of views. And I mean, it created a lot of good vibra, no? Repercussion among all the community and people from Cuba, in Miami. We just did another one a few days ago in regards to the tornado in Cuba, supporting the people, and that one just in 2 days already have like 300,000 views. Wow. Because people are really, it's just about love, about friendship, and people love it. Yeah.
So we actually have a question from YouTube. So this is from Albonese. They are asking, what misunderstandings do Cuban Americans who have never been to Cuba have about Cuba? And are there similar misunderstandings that Cubans have about Cuban Americans?
I from my perspective, and I think that I used the example of my wife before, when she was a child and she wants to leave Cuba to visit other countries, but with a section of the United States. Well, in Cuba, there is this conception, or I would say misconception, about the United States, and because the animosity between the two countries, the fight between the two countries, what is there is just sometimes, or for many people, the idea that Americans are bad, and that's not the case. I live and I work in a community where Americans care about other people, about environment, about inequalities. I mean, these people are just like Cuban people in a different environment. Now, from the perspective of the United States, I think that many people in the United States think that Cuba is just what the media and the animosity between the two countries have give this picture of a close type of regime and people that is not really true. There are, and that's one of the reasons, because I would like to encourage, and I encourage Americans to go to Cuba in the same way that I will encourage Cubans to come to the United States, because when people go there, and that happened in the previous trip that we had, people basically say, "Oh, this is not what I thought." I mean, what I have been seeing since the time I have this gentleman who is a parent, and he went to Cuba with me in July, and he's going again in April. He fell in love with Cuba, but he says, "Carlos, this is not what I learned when I was a kid. I mean, this is just regular people. I mean, I have read so much about politics, but I find out that in Cuba, we didn't talk even about politics. We talk about families, about things. I mean, we stay and we try to be with Cuban families. We don't go to hotels. We go to just regular people and regular families, for the families and the students to have an experience of knowing and learning, and not just for bringing our ideals of the United States, or our ideals of democracy, but also learning about the Cubans, about what they think, getting feedback. It's just a process that goes in both ways. It's not just trying to impose our perspective, but also learning about their perspective and accepting those the ones that fit better to build a better world. That's what I think.
Okay. So on that note, you are traveling to Cuba with your students. Can you share a little bit about what that trip is about and how it worked to raise funds and awareness for the tornado that happened in Cuba?
Well, we are traveling to Cuba, and we are under, in this case, as usual, is helping us Cuba Educational Travel. This organization really have been amazing in terms of connecting Cuba and the United States, creating bridge of love between the two countries, trying to find a commonality between both countries. And Cuba Educational Travel, as in the past, organized this trip. And in this trip, we are going to go to Cuba and visit artists. We are going to go to ONG projects for kids who are building something, and we are going to give support, exchanging with sports. And besides that, we are basically bringing humanitarian help for the people who suffer the tornado. And we don't bring a lot. We are in a school, and I have a classroom. But I can tell you, whatever we collect, whatever cans of tuna, the value that they have is not the amount that we bring, but the amount of love that is involved there. We probably are gonna go to one of place where they can distribute those donations to the people who basically affect by the tornado. But again, it's not just about the donations that we bring. It's about the being there and supporting those people with love, with friendship. That's the thing. And we are living in about 5 hours.
5 hours. Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, we have one more question from Rena, who's actually in the call. So Rena, if you want to go ahead and ask.
Hi, Carlos. My name is Rena Kraut. I'm the executive director of the Cuban-American Youth Orchestra, and that's an organization I founded to build bridges through music and through the arts between the people of the United States and Cuba. So everything you're saying about teaching with music and the arts and connecting people on a human level is really resonating. So thanks for being an inspiration. And we're bringing young people, about 30 young people from the United States to Cuba in May, to combine with the same amount of Cuban musicians for a celebratory concert. As we're working in this space, we, as you know, are in a sort of a more difficult time than we were a few years ago between our countries. But as an artist and as an individual, and especially as a non-Cuban American, what can I do, and what can people like me who love Cuba do to continue building these relationships, during these times, to maintain trust?
Well, I know that we are going through difficult times, and this is not the first time that our two countries have going through difficult times. Actually, we have been in worse times than this one. But what I have learned and can be helpful in this time for us, for people, for artists, for teachers, for people who want to create preachers of love, is that we shouldn't focus in the short term. We should not be focusing in the setbacks, in the bad things that are happening, because this happened, and probably in the future it could happen again. But we should focus in basically this idea of seeing ourselves as links of a change, of progress and love. Okay, it doesn't matter if we are the last link. Hopefully, I mean, I would like to be the one that see the progress that we are fighting for. But we shouldn't forget that every link is important, and to build the huge link that will bring us, because eventually that is going to come, to bring us to good relationship between the two countries, we should keep fighting without stop, without looking to the roadblocks in the road. No, we should keep fighting and fighting, because we are fighting for something that is good, something that is involve love, and love is never defeated. It could take years, it could take my whole life, but it could take 200 years, but still we are gonna succeed, because good things overcome bad things. That's what I believe. And in your case, I will say, keep going, keep fighting. If you see bad news about Cuba, about the relationship, don't focus on that. Just keep building something good. Do the best that you can every day.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Muchísimas gracias. We hope you have an awesome trip to Cuba and safe travels for you and your students. Thank you for all that you do. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Please join us for our next Hangout session in March with Liz Alfonso and Sima Funk. So thank you, everyone. Bye.
Ciao, Heidi. Ciao. Adios.